everyone. We're still at KubeCon, and you're still not. You're watching Techstrong, gang. Hey, everyone, it's Alan Schimmel, and we're here at KubeCon, wrapping up a full week of open source, cloud-native, Kubernetes joy. Or maybe it's joy. We're going to discuss that. Let me tell you who we've got to discuss it. We've got some of our core gang members who've been here all week. Let me introduce you to them. Well, you probably know most of them if you watch the Techstrong gang at all. On my far left, he's usually high, up in Colorado.
Don't put the pause in that.
He's at a higher elevation here in Salt Lake City, but anyway, it's our future VP of research for DevOps and some other stuff. I think even maybe cloud native. Yeah. Mitchell Ashley. Hey, Mitchell, welcome.
Great to be here. Great to be on with the gang.
Joining us, he's usually in Texas, but he's also here in Salt Lake City. I came to find out his family lived here in the 50s, so he's heritage.
Yeah, I wasn't in that family yet. But yes.
Okay. Well, I was going to say you were like a legacy now, so from now on, he'll be known as Flounder. No, but it's Guy Currier. Guy, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here as always.
And on my right, taking time out of his busy schedule, scouting minor league ball players for the Yankees here out west, our Chief Content Officer, Mike Vizard. Mike, welcome.
Happy to be back here. First time in 25 years.
20 years for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were talking about it. So let me put forth a proposition. No, not that one. But and then I'm interested in your takes on it. You know, they estimate there's 9,000 people at KubeCon. Mm-hmm. I estimate 1,500 of them are working at the 180 booths that are here on the floor. So there's probably 7,500 people attending Salt Lake City KubeCon. Not a number to sneeze at, but still not as big as it was pre-COVID North America, not as big as it is in America. You've got your keynotes, you got 24 tracks going on, sessions. You've got an expo hall that goes on forever in every direction that you can look at as far as the eye can see. Is it too much? Are people enjoying themselves? Are vendors getting their due who are paying good money to sponsor? Is there learning going on? Is it too overwhelming? Do we need to reorganize KubeCon? And if we're going to reorganize KubeCon, do we need to reorganize the whole sort of open source community way of doing things?
I've
got a lot of thoughts on this.
There or something.
Well, I don't know if you need to reboot it, but do they need to look at rebooting this event and how we organize this open source? It is a thriving community, but is it ever going to get to that next place?
Well, just to jump in, if you the number of people that have contributed to OpenTelemetry and also to Kubernetes, a lot of those people are here. Not all of them, of course, but over time that community has grown up. I think that's a big part of what's here is people that are contributing to open source, so it's as well as the consumers of it.
Okay. 2% of a community or less contributes to open source. So you're telling me this whole show is for those 2%? That's not.
No, I don't think that's all who's there, because the other part of it is, I spend most of my time talking to the vendor community, not going to keynotes and, developer meetings. And maybe they're just being positive, but they seem really happy with the show, and they're getting good leads out of it and connections. And
so
it's not the looky-loos like we used to see at RSA. Like, I'd like to get into security. What tchotchke do you have?
There are other mitigating factors at work here. One is, as much as I like Salt Lake City, the reason they're not at their pre-COVID numbers is, they went to places like Salt Lake City, Chicago, and Detroit. And so they're not really going to pull that kind of people that you would get into Vegas or Orlando and whatever else. So that's part of the issue. The other thing is, we talked to some of the vendors here. They didn't even bring their sales teams. They're here to kind of do some bonding with some end users of their technologies, and they're hoping that build a relationship and maybe sell them later on something they can upsell, because the open source business model is much more of a, let's get everybody in the community and then start peeling people off to see if we can get them to buy something later kind of thing. That model, whether it works or not, is debatable.
Well, that's the key word there, isn't it? Community. That's just what I was thinking about it. I mean, you'd have probably a better perspective than I would, but the open source has been about community from the beginning. It's also been about commercially taking advantage of community. And I think what you're highlighting is that kind of imbalance, because the vendors didn't come here for free. They paid for it. And I have the feeling that Linux Foundation, Cloud Native Computing Foundation, sold as many booths as they could possibly sell. So there's a huge demand from the vendor side to be part of this community, because Cloud Native in particular, Kubernetes in particular, is clearly at a market peak right now.
And I could make an argument. I agree with what you said. I could make an argument that DevRel is now expanding into platform engineering. There are companies here saying, I have to figure out my DevRel strategy for platform engineering.
What DevRel?
Well,
every DevRel person I know got laid off over the last 2 years.
I'm just telling you what I heard.
Yeah,
so,
I'm telling you real life. We know a lot of DevRel people.
Well, and it may be that's changed. What we thought of DevRel 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, maybe that's not what DevRel looks like now. I don't know.
Maybe the devs are not as relevant as they used to be in terms of making those platform decisions.
We've been talking, about this pendulum swing on a lot of our engagements. The grand pendulum swing that we've been experiencing since the days of the mainframe between everything is in the hardware and in the infrastructure. That's what the developers need to code to developers need to be served by the infrastructure side, and it's the software development that should be the center of gravity. I think we've experienced 5-6 years now with containerization, Kubernetes, all this focus on infrastructure and cloud. We've experienced a good 5 years now of very infrastructure-centric development in the industry. And I think that led to the kind of layoffs and the kind of concern around investing in the developer community. But it's just going to swing back, isn't it? It's just going to swing back.
Look, I've been involved in open source for 25, 30 years. So have you. Fundamentally, there was always a question in the open source community. What's a successful business model? And what did people tell you? Look at Red Hat. Look at Red Hat. Red Hat, the poster child of open source success. IBM paid, $12 billion. Mm-hmm. Red Hat changed their licensing on their flagship product. What does that tell you? Well, HashiCorp, probably one of the most successful open source companies out here, changed their licensing. Yes, we forked OpenTofu, but HashiCorp still sold maybe less billions than it maybe would have. I'm telling you that fundamentally, these companies give you that happy talk or from George Orwell in 1984 about, we don't want salespeople here. We want to kumbaya with the community. Bullshit. They want to sell product.
Are you suggesting that open source maybe is an unsustainable welfare state?
I think you said they're at the peak. Pat Riley was one of the greatest basketball coaches in the world, in history. Great teams at Los Angeles, the Knicks, the Heat. Why did he go to all those different teams rather than staying like Red Auerbach at the Celtics or John Wooden at UCLA? Because you can only stay on that peak so long before you fall off. And I think, and I'll call it, I think the last 5 years have been a golden era, maybe the last 10 years even, have been a golden era of open source, where we saw extreme experimentation on open source models. We had open core. We had foundational open source, where Foundation supported these things with multiple companies, participating, where we invested a lot of people who wore funny hats and went around with purple hair talking about kumbaya and delivering delight in their software, and that would magically lead to dollars at the end of that rainbow. And here's what happened. Companies had to change their licensing. They found out that those people in the funny hats and purple hair didn't necessarily translate into paying customers, that the open core model does have commercial application,
Yeah.
but that the fundamental numbers haven't changed. Out of 100% of people in the community, a handful, not even 2%, a handful actually contribute code. 2% maybe will contribute other ways. They'll contribute bugs, test beta, do stuff like that. And in an open source community, if you get 3 to 4% of your users converted to paid customers, you got a successful business. But it's very hard taking that to 10% or even 8%.
It's hard to present that to your startup board at the C round and say, we're going to keep doing that.
That's it.
That's
now,
the issue.
And that's fine when it's all a cottage industry. This is no longer a cottage industry. And so
It's a pretty big cottage. If you didn't-
it's kind of like on Jekyll Island if you've ever been there. But
There's another trend that's playing into this in a couple of conversations I had with a few of the senior IT folks who are here. And they're basically saying because of the incidents of what happened with Log4j, they're not buying anything or not allowing anything into production that doesn't have a sizable community around it. Because if it's only supported by a handful of people, they're like, that's a recipe for disaster. So they're starting to put some different guardrails in place for a lot of these projects. And a lot of these projects aren't going to meet that metric. And they're going to be not going to survive.
The problem becomes when those smaller projects that don't have the full
become
support.
orphaned.
Well, orphans, yes, exactly. Or they're still embedded within the things that do have a lot of support. That's what happened with Log4j.
And I'll put forth, it's not just the smaller projects. I personally know of some very big projects that the companies who originally hosted them would love to get out from under because they've moved on.
Well, I'm getting confused. Is this podcast about open source or is it about KubeCon?
This is the Techstrong gang. We talk about whatever the hell we want.
But I thought we were okay. So we just veered off, and I'm kind of
calling the timeout.
The argument is also we're saying that for all intents and purposes, the Cloud Native Foundation now is the leadership of open source community.
This is where open source lives.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, sure. And I get the funny feeling that there are other things that live here besides open source.
Money.
There are very few,
commercialization, money, if you like.
There are very few things that live here that are not open source.
Right.
Or that are not dependent on open source, or that don't contribute to open source.
Or at least pretend to be.
It just, the origin of open, we just come a long way, baby, from the origins of open source.
Yes, we have. This is not the
and I think that may be your fundamental point here, Alan, is like, you started off with this true statement, just look around, look at the preponderance of vendors and products and pitches and messages and all of that other sort of stuff in comparison to practitioners and collaborators and contributors. That's the market space we're in right now. We haven't mentioned the elephant that came in and tromped all over everything. Namely, it starts with an A and ends with an I and doesn't have any letters in between. I feel like, that huge investment, a huge concrete global IT boost is being played out here right around us right now in so many ways.
I think 80% of these companies are
we're not immune.
viable.
Sorry, we're not immune in an open source community of collaborators trying to build value through that collaboration. Oh. We're not immune from that grand commercial force.
I use the ecosystem word, but that's what's around.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, we're not immune.
We debated this a little bit, and I think this is where you're going. But if AI becomes the new mechanism by which I engage with all software, at some point, all those things in the back end converge because I'm just going to call them and I'm not going to care whether or not it was Prometheus, Kubernetes, or Grafana or whatever the hell else was on the back end. It's just all going to be one API call motion that mixes and matches as I go. So, am I going to have 175 projects, or are they all really features of something?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, is it all
Not
under
only
the covers?
projects,
Yeah.
if you walk down here, those 10 by 10 booths are fast and furious. And there's probably 120 of them over here.
It's overwhelming, actually.
How many of them are viable companies?
I don't know. You tell me.
I could count it on my hands and toes.
I mean, I'm sure there's
you're in the
statistics.
10%
Hands and toes.
range.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's 1 out of 10.
Yeah.
It's 1 out of 10.
I think it may be 1 out of
And
50.
That
Yeah, let's split the middle. Let's say it's 1 out of 25
Okay,
or
1 out of
whatever it is,
25.
right? And out of those that are remaining, how many are going to be subsumed by some other
Well,
brand?
they
some
all
other
get
bigger
subsumed,
vendor?
right?
Yeah.
But just to put a point on this dot, right? So a couple of years ago, it was like, oh, well, you got to get to the developers because they bring you in and they're the big, powerful influencers.
Right.
That was the whole DevRel.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that's fallen off. I think what we're seeing is a shift back towards platform engineering, centralized IT, standardized platforms, and those guys are going to decide what the
So
thing
you
is.
telling me
There's a
the
shift
2
back?
martini lunches back?
Maybe.
There's a shift back to the monolith.
golf. What time's our tea time?
There's a shift back to the monolith. I've heard that at least 5 times at this show.
Have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I've heard it. I've heard that as well with the nuance to it, whereas the monolith has got some APIs wrapped around it, and it's just a big ass microservice. But other than that, it's the same thing.
A macro microservice?
Macro.
A mega microservice? Like, what is
Yeah.
that?
There's a variation on that. What I hear is the target is enterprise, large enterprise,
Yes.
not mid-tier, not small.
Mhm.
It is.
No doubt. It's
Everybody's
large
going
enterprise.
after the scale.
Well, because, so here's the thing. You got to look at this in connection to the macro world. The tech industry, dollars have dried up from VCs. VCs are saying, show me traction.
Yeah.
Show me traction. Show me paying customers. And I think what a lot of these companies have discovered is they've got to be in that enterprise market to make that kind of money. And
And
so
they're who have the problems that appear at scale, right? Versus this is new, interesting technology.
And all
Let me
the
use
tech
it.
startups that were buying or using a lot of this open source software themselves have
Oh, yeah.
disappeared, right?
or their budgets are tight as well. Their budgets are tight as well.
What's interesting is I don't see a lot of security people here.
Not as much as in past years.
Yeah. And isn't that so? You've got Sonatype, you've got a few folks that are in that area, but it doesn't have as strong a presence as I thought. By the way, I had one person say, I came here, I can't believe how much AI there is. I didn't expect that. I'm like, where have you been?
Didn't expect the AI here?
Yeah, where have you been?
I don't know.
Bit
I had a
scary.
weird conversation went like this. It's like, yeah, all the things you guys are saying are absolutely correct, but I'm still building a monolith. And I said, why? Because monolith is easier to build. And if the monolith is successful, then I'm hoping to have all those other problems, and I'll get to them later.
There is
I
that.
have lifetime employment for all the problems I created in my monolith. Okay.
Let me just play devil's advocate because we're almost out of time here. The fact is, this is a huge petri dish. All these companies here, the issue is, yes, only maybe 1 out of 10, 1 out of 25, 1 out of 50 may in fact make it. It's knowing which one
Cool. Yeah.
is the hard
Exactly.
part, right? And everyone here, you could take 180 odd projects, but everyone takes a different view and uses it in a way maybe that hasn't been thought of before. And it's almost like evolution right before your eyes. And so maybe new things are synthesized out of this. But my closing argument is I'd like to see the CNCF reorganize KubeCon. I think the average person, it's too much for him to wrap their heads around, or her to wrap their head around at this show. I don't know what the answer is, doing micro shows or stuff
Let
that.
me take the counterpoint. Just
Go
to
ahead.
take the counterpoint.
Come on, Jane.
Rather than a petri dish, which I get, it's also the sorting hat, right? Because every one of these companies, not the ones that are well more established in the bigger booths.
I would say like Intel. Oh, maybe not.
those guys. Yeah. They do what we did in startup land, which is here's a problem. Let's go, see if the market's got that problem and build a product around it. The problem is they're a big enough market. That's the next challenge. And that's the sorting hat, right? Is there enough people that want network figured out and security as we interconnect, multi-cloud, blah, 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 blah. Is that valuable enough to pay money? That's the sorting. So I would argue that the sorting hat has worked pretty good.
Okay.
So let the sorting hat sort.
But what's the mechanism of the sorting hat? I mean, I don't want to stretch your.
The market.
No, I hear you. I don't want to stretch your metaphor too far. Okay,
Go for break it. You can do whatever.
Well, yeah, thank you. One of the things that has struck me about all of these messages and stories, whether it's keynotes, vendor meetings that I've had, a few customer discussions I've had, is that there's a whole lot of talk about what this widget or this tool or this contribution, what it allows, what the outcome is, a technical outcome. Now we can scale to 10,000, or now we can, handle a model of this size, or whatever it is. And there has been almost none about how they accomplish it, how it's done. It's. I don't want to say that it's like empty stories and messaging, because there's clearly substance behind it. But why isn't anybody talking about that? It's almost as if you're just supposed to trust us, and this is how it works. Here's our demo. That seems to be the level of excitement and interest.
But isn't that an indictment of society in general? No one looks. I don't want to get macro on you.
I cracked open the door. It was totally an accident. Forgive me.
All right.
All I heard was Petri dish, and now I need a hazmat suit.
I think the Petri dish idea is a little bit more compelling.
Sticking with sorting hat.
Because there are colonies that are going to grow, and there are those that are going to die out. It's going to be through a natural competitive mechanism.
All right, we got 1 minute left. We're going to do a little speed dating. Your big story, favorite thing at KubeCon this year, Mitch?
Kubernetes everywhere. It is the dominant. It is the operational workload operating system.
Your favorite?
I've been impressed by the dark horse of this conference, which is WebAssembly, WASM.
WASM. Good.
That's the dark horse. Dark horse or force?
We're going to talk about this probably in the next show, but my favorite is patent trolls, man. They're after all the open source guys, and there's high drama and conflict. What more do you want?
What patents? We don't need no stinking patents. Look, for me, it's the viability of open source business models. And I thought for a while that we'd answered that question, but I'm beginning to think we haven't.
That coin flipped. I agree.
All right. Hey, we hope you enjoyed this. We're going to be back Monday with a fresh Techstrong gang. But for now, as I said, we're here in Salt Lake City. You're not. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out.